Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, listening to the Honorable Member Charlie, I'm persuaded that he has been urbanized, very much so, and he seems to be in the company of Mr. Honorable Dharmalal. So I will not waste much time in debunking what he would have said, but more specifically, to make reference to one of the comments made by the Honorable Minister of Agriculture when he made reference to epology. And he apparently had in his possession some letter. I too have a letter in my possession from the chairman of epology. And I will just want to read part of this letter, where he stated very definitively, and this is what he said: so far, we have come across a number of affected persons who did not have the opportunity to register their losses, as well as some of who register their losses but have not been, but were excluded from the list of recipients of flood relief. In this regard, we are seeking your intervention. Mr. Minister, did you intervene in ensuring that these issues were addressed? This is a letter from Mr. Vincent Alexander, debunking what you would have said to this House. And it is most unfortunate, Mr. Minister. And I will forward you this letter. Mr. Speaker, I rise to join colleagues in this House to speak to Budget 2022. A budget, Mr. Speaker, that is an installation of a menu of measures that does not reflect the wishes and the desires of the majority of people who essentially will have to live with the ravages of increased poverty. But Mr. Speaker, equally, sir, it begs the question, where is the systematic developmental plan that shows a year after year projection? In this close to 6 hours long speech, very impressive, 92 pages filled with words that does not clearly define a strategic and systematic time-bound developmental plan. It must be noted from the outset, Mr. Speaker, that the coalition views this budget as anti-poor, anti-working class, given its orientation to be pro-business in a time when grave hardship is facing the majority of our Guyanese citizens. Mr. Speaker, we were told by the government last Wednesday that food prices rose by 11.5% last year. I want to ask, which food specifically does this percentage represent? This must be some type of voodoo economics at play here, because almost all of the essential items to food for a food basket to sustain a household saw increases by a mere 25% in 2021, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget, and by extension this government, has failed to give a clear direction of where we are going as a nation in tandem with the projected economic growth patterns. Mr. Speaker, when one dissects the bulk of political rhetoric from the minister's speech in his effort to legitimize the space he and others are occupying on that side, one can appreciate the haste in putting together this document. Because, Mr. Speaker, their time is coming to an end. Flowery and well-sugar-coated speeches cannot fool the people all the time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister, in the twilight of his presentation, posited that it is his fervent hope that this budget will be judged on its merits. And I can assure him that this is what we on this side endeavor to do and will do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the main reasons for the minister's lopsided approach to budget 2022 is Budget 2022, not addressing the plight of the poor, was the government's remoteness from structural planning and the colonial import of governance. The utilization and the divide and rule governance practices accompanied by a cut and paste quasi-economic policy would have engendered what we see at page 39 and 40 of the budget speech, where no funds are earmarked for small businesses in Region 10. Correspondingly, Mr. Speaker, one needs to ask who benefited from the VAT removal on building materials besides the private sector. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, prices for materials got even higher after the removal of VAT. Cement, steel, zinc, nails, all of these materials, Mr. Speaker, rise in prices, making it far more difficult for the working poor, for the public servants to build their homes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, who benefited from the freight adjustment, which prices decreased as a result of this government's concession to the private sector? None, Mr. Speaker. No one benefited except the private sector. But it is no surprise, Mr. Speaker. One just has to be reminded of what the Honorable Minister Indar said in 2020. And here is what he said, and I quote, "Everybody has to make money and the government will facilitate it." But is this really happening, Mr. Speaker? Who is making this money? Who is making this money, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 represents an unadulterated extortion of the people's money and fails with distinction to address the multitude of issues that plague our poor, vulnerable, and underprivileged citizens of Ghana. We, Mr. Speaker, have to emancipate our citizens from the government's hamper distribution policy that is at the core of their governance policy. Mr. Speaker, we are told that this budget will be funded by oil inflows, but the de facto management of the supposed board is not yet in place as prescribed to replace the superior arrangements of the NRF Act of 2019. But what is spurious about the government, Mr. Speaker, is that they moved to repeal the NRF Act of 2019. They say it was illegal, but the same install regime collected billions of dollars in 2021 via GRA using Act 16 of 2019 Custom Amendment Schedule, which was also promulgated in 2019. It is clear, it is very clear, Mr. Speaker, that the intent was only to raid the oil funds using the parliament as cover. This is the nefarious nature of this installed regime, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is most disappointing to note and recognize the intellectual masturbation of the minister about the current and projected oil revenues, coupled with the significant rise in the country's GDP due to the anticipated high oil prices. Despite his hysteria, despite, Mr. Speaker, his orgasmic moment about the country's new economic standing, his government has failed to offer the poor, the vulnerable, the struggling masses, and any real hope of a better life against their real life challenges, unearthed as a result of the management of the affairs of this administration. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance claimed that he had difficulty navigating policy instruments to deal with prices increase. Is this really so, Honorable Minister? Can you raise the income tax threshold to 100,000? Or as you have moved the increase in education cash grant, which is a good thing. We welcome this increase. The same approach can be utilized across the board as a policy instrument that represents equity. Please note that I have chosen not to say transparency because experiences for the COVID grant and the flood grant speaks volume about the PPP accountability. Mr. Speaker, the government's paltry offerings of a mere $10,000 increase in the tax threshold, when cost of living is violently abusing and blamming away at the shattered door of the poor and the vulnerable, is indicative of the government's scant regard for the working class and the working poor in this country. Mr. Speaker, any reasonable thinking person who is living in today's harsh reality of these extremely high costs of living would have provided its citizens with a reasoned increase of about $60,000. Given this incontestable fact, Mr. Speaker, that trained teachers, nurses, constable, policemen, army, armed forcemen, most of which the government is aware, Mr. Speaker, gets less than $500 a month. And you could not have seen the common sense approach in ensuring that our public servants, who keeps the engine of government running, be given a livable increase. Come on, man. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, what is most flabbergasting about this government and the many ministers who would have presented thus far, how they would have had such a braggadocious approach and a celebratory tone with a mere 3% increase, $3,000 increase to old age pension, a braggadocious appeal by the ministers boasting about $3,000 increase to old age pensioners, Mr. Speaker. $3,000. The Honorable Prime Minister is also happy with his $3,000. Mr. Speaker, $3,000 equates, Mr. Speaker, to $100 a day. $100 a day. You have given our public servants, our old age citizens, the Honorable Member, Honorable Gail Teixeira, should be disappointed in this paltry sum. She has been a tireless, hard-working public servant, and I agree, and I am disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that this very hard-working senior member of the government could not have used a very persuasive style of arguing to persuade our own cabinet to ensure that senior citizens like ourselves are beneficiaries of a significant increase to cushion the harsh realities of high cost of living. This is total wickedness, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance reported in his budget presentation to state that the NIS as if the state of the NIS as if it was sick financially because of someone else's doing. He was in charge of the plunder of workers' money from NIS for political projects investing in Clico, the Barbies Bridge, the Marriott. These projects guaranteed returns to private persons at the expense of hard-working Guyanese public servants who would have made significant contributions to NIS, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the chief heckler is trying to distract me. The government's chief heckler is trying to distract me. But I will not be distracted from bringing the truth to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. Guy Suko was given over $50 billion for the last 7 years, but still owes NIS millions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honorable Minister say what he's doing about this to ensure that our public servants who are dependent now on NIS gets their dues, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, we on this side say that budget 2022 is not pro-poor. We do not, Mr. Speaker. We do not say so we say so, Mr. Speaker, out of deep concern for the ordinary people who will have to withstand the effects of the government's policies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can you believe This government in 2022 has said that they care about the working class in this country. The average working class in this country, Mr. Speaker, owns a vehicle that is 1500 cc and less. But what did this government do, Mr. Speaker? Instead of lowering the tax so that more hard-working public servants, the police who protect you, the army who protect you, should have been in a position to buy a car. But what did they do? They reduced the taxes on vehicles above 1500 cc. Wickedness, Mr. Speaker. Wickedness. Mr. Speaker, I move to the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport. The left minister, I'm told. Mr. Speaker, this is a ministry I have been given the task to shadow. But Mr. Speaker, for the past two budget debates, I am yet to hear, Guyana, Mr. Speaker, is yet to hear from the minister with responsibility for this very important ministry to adumbrate some intelligent ideas, articulating the vision for the ministry in those debates past, Mr. Speaker, which he has failed to do. But hopefully, sir, me being an optimist, I will wait when he comes after me to offer something of substance for his ministry. So it is important for his ministry that is so important for Guyana, so important to the majority of our people in Guyana, our youths, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, preserving, Mr. Speaker, I hasten to say to the minister, before he comes, that Guyana, and more specifically, the youth of this country, are least interested in your version of the happenings during the election period that resulted in the regime being on that side of the house. You are in the seat of government. We are least concerned with what happened then over and over every budget, wasting valuable time to set up an agenda for the ministry. We are least interested in him coming to repeat under the coalition, there were 3 ministers. We don't want to hear that, Mr. Speaker. Our young people want to hear from the Honorable Minister. We want you to tell us, if it is possible, no pressure, if it is possible, tell this nation what are your ministry's plan for the billions more you have been in receipt of to develop, enhance, and propel Guyana into higher heights in culture and sports with the collective contribution of our country's most valuable assets, our young people. Mr. Speaker, preserving one's heritage is an important aspect of national life for any self-respecting government. Thus, the National Museum must be treated with respect. As we debate here today, the exterior of the building and its immediate environs are so unkept for the longest time in the middle of the city, Mr. Speaker. I wish if the media could take note and made this reveal to the rest of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to culture and the promotion of it, I dare say it goes beyond virtual concerts, of which the minister and his cohorts, his gang of role models, who benefits from the promotion of these activities, that he will have to provide answers to the people of this country when it comes to those estimates. Mr. Speaker, after these concerts, after the bright lights has come off, after the stage is dismantled, what's next? What's next, Mr. Speaker? What's next for all those talented artists the minister had in 2021? This is what he did. He hosted Guyana Talent Search. And it appeared, Mr. Speaker, as if he was in search of himself. The minister was the most featured person, rather than the artists, on all the radio stations of the state, on all the television stations of the state. The minister was in search of himself, denying talented Guyanese an opportunity for national and international exposure. Mr. Speaker, what is the end game in all of this? Is it to ensure that the honor, as what the Honorable Indar posited, money got to make? Or is it to ensure that the artists get some money? And we are of the full view that our talented artists in this country, Mr. Speaker, must be highly compensated. After all, they are showcasing their talents for Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I dare say, Mr. Speaker, that should not be the end game after the talent has been discovered. Mr. Speaker, it is well known that Guyana has a plethora of talented young musicians who oftentimes find it challenging to pay for studio time. We need a government facility, and it is a recommendation I am putting to the Honorable Minister for serious consideration. Serious. I have done this numerous times, and sadly to the detriment of the ministry, none of those brilliant proposals have been put by this minister. But I am not dissuaded in offering Guyana the best of ideas for our people. So I say to the ministry and to the minister with responsibility, Guyana needs a facility where our young people can go and be provided with the services to help them in their craft. Mr. Speaker, the minister must endeavor to help our nation's talented youths by offering them scholarships to the universities, home and abroad, to enhance their passion in the arts. The minister should invest in establishing a national music and photography studio for youths to have hands-on opportunities to learn how to make and produce music, be exposed to voice and vocal training, and use the different musical instruments that bring the song of beautiful music, Mr. Speaker. Each region, Mr. Speaker, should also be provided with some of the same facilities to seek out, find, and nurture those talents to the benefit of those individuals, their families, communities, and by extension, the country. It is in this regard, Mr. Speaker, I call on the government, after recognizing in the East Talent Search that Guyana has real talent, real musicians, real singers. I call on the government, Mr. Speaker, and I wish the Honorable Anil Nandalal was here, because he is one of the ministers who's actually working to bring copyright legislation so that our talented artists' intellectual properties, Mr. Speaker, intellectual properties can be protected, and they can actually make money on the use of their intellectual property. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the ministry should embark on a regional exchange program from regions 1 to 10 for Guyana's youth to know and experience our cultural differences as a people. We should have students, young people from Region 6 going to Region 10. Students from Region 7 going to Region 2. So we'd have an interlink of experiences, and so that we could really, truly aspire as a nation to make the president's pronouncement of a One Guyana a real reality. It starts with programs and initiatives like that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the diversity of Guyana gives us a unique advantage, Honorable Kwame McCoy, a unique advantage that does not present itself anywhere else in the region, and I think the world. We have 6 beautiful people, not you, Mr. McCoy, but we have 6 beautiful people, with the exception of the honorable member, with different cultural practices, religion, food, music, customs, norms, etc. That we as Guyanese, Mr. Speaker, embrace as ours. We embrace each other's culture. We participate in Pagwa. We participate in Christmas. We participate in Diwali. We see these occasions as Guyanese, Mr. Speaker. So we have to, Mr. Speaker, be serious in our approach of how we deal with ensuring that we forge a one Guyana that can become a reality. As our motto say, one people, one nation, aspiring to achieve one destiny. Mr. Speaker, we share this with the rest of the world. This is an opportunity we have to expose our culture to the rest of the world. Our culture that is so unique. It is time, Mr. Speaker, for brand Guyana in music, dance, art, and craft. It is time to brand our culture, Mr. Speaker. The question is, why haven't we done so? Poor leadership, Mr. Speaker. No vision and leadership at the ministry. Mr. Speaker, we have seen, and it is very sad. It is very sad, Mr. McCoy, that mushroom money, our own, reflective of our indigenous people, not Amerindians, Brother Charlie, our indigenous people. Mushroom money, one of our national cultural events, has not been given the type of government support for it to grow and mushroom into the country's #1 cultural event that showcases Guyanese identity on an international scale, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mashimani should be given the much needed resources and branded to the world as Guyana's version of Carnival. This is our own Carnival, Mr. Speaker, and it should be given government support to ensure that this becomes a reality. Mashimani, Mr. Speaker, like crop over in Barbados, should be on a national platform where the world comes to Guyana and engage in what we have to offer as a people, as a nation of 6 people. Mr. Speaker, business community, the private sector that this budget caters so much for, should be given special concessions for the government, from the government, for their participation and contribution in helping to elevate MASH so that the country's premier national event can be materialized. Rather, Mr. Speaker, we see another country's culture being given priority right here in Guyana. That is an indictment to us as leaders. We are promoting someone else's culture when we have our own Mashimani, a product that we as Guyanese can develop, Mr. Speaker. It is a crying shame. Mr. Speaker, I have said it once, and it is worth repeating. It is time for brand Guyana. The time is now for the rest of the world to know we exist, beyond the discovery of tons of cocaine, beyond having the largest suicide rate in the world, and for our newfound wealth, our oil resource. We should be known for more than that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must be known for our uniqueness as one people with 6 different ethnicities. The collective wealth we share in this country, Mr. Speaker, is our Guyanese-ness, which is a brand, and it must be showcased to the world. There should be opportunities for our young people to participate in the arts and theater, in acting, Mr. Speaker, playwriting, videography, directing. We need to see our own people in our locally produced movies, sitcoms, cartoons, with our own Guyanese dialect. With our own Guyanese dialect. The time has come. The time is now for Guyana, Mr. Speaker, to establish its own film industry. I call on the minister to use wisdom and ensure that these proposals become our Guyanese reality. Don't see it as it coming from the opposition. See it coming from a Guyanese who want the best for this country. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, finally, it is well known that Guyana has, as I have said, Mr. Speaker, a plethora of talent. And it is time we here in Guyana produce a next Eddie Grant, produce a next Poonan Singh, a Diana Chapman, a Joe Moore, a Natural Black, a Samuel Medas. But these opportunities has to be created by government playing a more decisive role, a more leading role in ensuring that our youth, our young people are given the best of opportunities to succeed in the world. Sports, Mr. Speaker, sports has played the distractor is at its best. Mr. Speaker, sport has to play a more defining role in carving out our national identity.
Honorable member, before you can carve that out further, you need more time.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, honorable member. You may continue to do your carving out for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you should listen to this part of the presentation. I know you're an ardent cricket fan and a table tennis player. So I know you have a keen interest in sports. And I know you want sports to develop here in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. Your own efforts is testimony to the marvelous and magnificent work the Speaker would have done at the FS Ground. Sports, no, you will agree with me, Mrs.
Honorable member, I think it has to do with the connection in the front row by where the honorable member Jones is. Just give us a few minutes. I stopped your clock at 2:08. Just try one more time, let's see. Okay, we have to get the technicians again. Okay, try again, honorable member.
Yes, yes.
Chris, the honorable member, Mr. Jones, seems to be at the controls. That's a new arrangement with Chief Whips. Honorable member, it's now 2:09. You have lost 2 minutes. You'll get them back. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sports has to play a more defining role in carving out our national identity. And I dare say, yet again, Mr. Speaker, the minister is visionless in this regard. Visionless, Mr. Speaker. He has a gender's view of what is needed to develop this ministry, of what is needed to develop sports in this country, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I say so not to intentionally belittle the Honorable Minister. That is not my forte, Mr. Speaker. I believe the Minister does that himself with regal grace. He spent the entirety of 2021 budget presentation at the polling station. This man is obsessed with GCOM, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my contention is to inform. My position I have articulated concerning this minister, and is very limited ability to push this ministry, Mr. Speaker, is informed by his very tenure at the ministry thus far. And it would be remiss of me, sir, if I failed to state what I would have aforementioned, that the minister is a misfit. is a misfit for this portfolio. He, by his own action, has put forward a no confidence motion against himself. He is a total misfit, and I have seen a few ministers of the government, I believe, is doing work. I may not agree many times with the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, but he is a minister who is working. I do not agree with many things said by the Honorable Attorney General, but he is working. And he's working assiduously to ensure that the contents of petition, that our petition does not succeed. Because he knows the rebels dressed minister in Mars, Mr. Speaker. I am so thankful that the Honorable Carlin Rodriguez is still working for this ministry. I am happy, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Carl Greenidge is there and the former Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Robert Prasad. These two people have contributed to saving our image on the international scene. But let me go back to my portfolio, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this nation is yet to be aware of the minister and by extension, the government overarching time-bound developmental plan. The government's overarching time-bound developmental plan for the ministry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I say that the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports, and more specifically sports, Mr. Speaker, needs to go beyond ground enhancement. It needs to go beyond balls distribution. Mr. Speaker, this country has a number of talented athletes. And the Olympics, Mr. Speaker, presents over 40 disciplines, 33 summer sports and 17 winter Olympic games, respectively, of which our option to choose from the variety that exists, of which we can competitively participate. We don't want to just attend these functions, Mr. Speaker. We want to go there with the intent to be competitive and actually win. So, Mr. Speaker, I see an opportunity is before us to identify and prepare several identified sports disciplines, of which we have the greatest chance of winning Olympic medals, and focus on those disciplines as a national priority, and more so with a time frame, Mr. Speaker. But of course, Mr. Speaker, not forsaking the other potentials in the respective disciplines. We must have a phase-by-phase developmental strategy. The minister must, Mr. Speaker, retire from the optics. Who cares which staff cried, Mr. Speaker, on seeing the quality of chairs at the culture center? What does that concern us, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, here is where the minister must invest available limited resources that is much needed, Mr. Speaker, for durable infrastructure, for those disciplines to have, more importantly, for invest in our technical personnel. Mr. Speaker, this country has a paltry of qualified coaches, of qualified nutritionists. These are the people, Mr. Speaker, the personnel, the technical people, the coaches, the referees, nutritionists, and all.
Time to wind down, honorable member.
Thank you. Allow me 1 minute to conclude. Mr. Speaker, this industry needs qualified people to provide the best training and the technical guidance that is required for our athletes to have the best chances of succeeding, Mr. Speaker. We see monies for ground enhancement, but we see no enhanced players. And it is a reason for that. We don't have the skill set of personnel that is required. Even at the ministry, the minister's own personal assistant, what technical capacity does these individuals have that the minister surrounds himself with, that massages his ego? We need to move beyond self if we are to develop sports, develop culture, and more so, develop our youth. Mr. Speaker, finally, all of what budget 2022 offers are not bad. Some are good, but the majority of it has lacked the public consultation has lacked the ingredients of the opposition's contribution in making this budget a superior budget. And is it that, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support budget 2022. I thank you.
Thank you, honorable member.